here.
Great, that was a terrific overview. John, the private sector.
All right, well, hope my microphone's working, but
Want to get that one?
Yeah, you can
okay,
get.
That's
all
all
right,
right.
great, thank you. Well, it's a pleasure to be here, everyone. My name is John Queen. I am from the private sector, admittedly, so I think what my view is today is I will talk through the project that I'm working on right now, and then I will explain how the international financial institutions and the bilateral partners can support and are necessary to support a project such as mine. So long story short, the project that I'm here to present today is the Berezan Port Project. If we can go to the first slide.
Make sure the Zoom people see it. Okay.
So essentially, the Berezan Port Project is a large intermodal industrial hub that we're building on the Black Sea. And it's in the Mykolaiv region of Ukraine, so not in the actual kinetic hot zone of the war, but it is in an area that obviously is on the Black Sea and everything that is involved with that. We are going to begin groundwork on the construction after the war, obviously, just because, as everyone can understand, appreciate, you don't want to create a target for yourself. And it also, frankly speaking, is very difficult to mobilize large amounts of workers right now in Ukraine due to the military need and the obligations that people have to their country at this time. The vision of the project is to, if you can imagine a situation after the war where Ukraine is headed towards EU accession, it's going to be dealing with reindustrializing itself from the way that the Russians have waged war in Ukraine, focused on industrial and residential and civilian objects. And our project is based on helping to support that reindustrialization by building a large tax advantage industrial zone attached to what will be one of the largest modern seaports with air, rail, and road modality attached to it on Ukraine's Black Sea. And we're talking about 20-meter depth seaport, which will allow Cape-sized vessels, which is the largest kind of shipping vessels. And the idea is that as Ukraine gains EU accession, this will become one of the leading ports for the trans-European network, and it will allow Ukraine and also the surrounding European countries and people that are interested to ship to the European continent to ship their products in and out in a very direct way, while also potentially producing and storing their products right on the port. If we can go to the next slide. So a general overview is we're talking about 10 port terminals, over 25 kilometers of berthing that will cover all types of cargoes from agricultural products, metals and mining, to petroleum products. If we can go to the next slide. And because this is located 50 kilometers from any city, we're able to build something large and expansive in a way that's not constrained by kind of urban life. And so we're talking about building an industrial zone of roughly 10,000 acres, that's 4,000 hectares, which will have a tax-free regime allowing manufacturers and companies interested to produce and store their products to do so next to a large modern port without import and export taxes. And we are working, it's a work in progress with the Ukrainian government to basically figure out what the legislation of that will work on. There's many different kind of industrial zone projects being discussed in Ukraine right now. Ours is one of them. And that is a work in progress. We actually have a government agency, which I'll cover on the next slide, that's been created to support this project. And the key thing also is we're not just talking about shipping, we're talking about air, rail, and road. So we're really trying to put a big flag on the Black Sea in Ukraine that says, look, Ukraine is open for business. We're going to heavily industrialize this zone, and we're going to make it really easy and simple for you to ship your products from point A to point B and to store your products here. So we're interested in basically becoming a logistical center of choice. Next slide, please. So in terms of the numbers, and this is where partnerships come in. So this type of project obviously is very ambitious. We're slightly south of $800 million, which was staged out over 4 stages. We're currently in stage 1, which is the design documentation, technical and feasibility study, and attraction of private investors. Over 2 years is the intended life of this stage, and depending on how much construction we are undertaking, that could be up to $54 million. The numbers that are here are generated by KPMG in Ukraine, who has done a 60-page kind of commercial feasibility study for us. It's available with an NDA. We also have project teasers and different public documents that are available without an NDA. Stage 2 of the project involves the actual kind of groundbreaking work. We're not going to anticipate starting this until after the war, for all the reasons that one can understand and appreciate. And that is estimated about a 2-year period with slightly south of $600 million price tag attached to it. In parallel with that stage, we're talking about building out the industrial park. And that will be over a 5-year period, but that will also start during that 2-year port construction. And that is anticipated to be about $150 million construction project. And then stage 4 is just the continuous expansion. Because we're 50 kilometers away from any major cities, we really do have a lot of room to grow, and it will grow with the flow of business. If we can move to the next slide. So again, what's the idea of this? The idea of this is to put Ukraine in an even more favorable position to extend the trans-European transport network, which is one of the key shipping networks from Baltic to Black Sea through the European continent. Again, our total CapEx is around slightly south of 800 million. Payback period 10.1 years, according to the KPMG numbers. IRR 16%, according to the KPMG analysts. And to just kind of show what type of volume we're talking about, as we reach the initial maximum loading rate based on the current design of the project, that will equate to roughly 28.3 million tons of cargo per year through the port. And we anticipate that this could increase up to 100 million as we continue to expand. So we're really talking about building something large and meaningful. We can move to the next slide, please. The current state of play is that we've created the agency within Ukraine's government called the Berezan Marine Industrial Cluster to support our project's development. That includes legislative and regulatory aspects and environmental considerations. We are working with KPMG and with Jacobs. KPMG has done a lot of our commercial feasibility study. Jacobs is doing the technical work, the large engineering company here. It's international, but based in the United States. They are going to be involved because of the scale of the project. There's a lot of environmental concerns, and there's a large amount of stage 1, which I covered on a previous slide, is involved with the technical and feasibility work that Jacobs is undertaking for us. And we are talking to DFC, and we're having some preliminary discussions with other groups about insurance and potential debt finance. DFC has, graciously made itself available to talk to potential investors with us, as those arise about our project and how they could participate in it. And where we are right now is we are always in fundraising mode. So we are always actively seeking investors and or syndicated finance commitments. We're not looking to necessarily take money right now, but we're looking at commitments and strategic partners while we build out all the steps we need so that when the war ends, we can hit the ground running. Where this ties back to international financial institutions and bilateral partners. I've just described to you a very large and ambitious project that is very complicated. What are the key aspects to projects such as mine that are large and ambitious that want to be part of Ukraine's recovery to happening? And what are the bottlenecks? One of the bottlenecks is when you're talking about large reconstruction projects, or even if you're talking about existing businesses that are trying to assess strategic plans or reconstruction of their lost assets, there's a lot of technical and feasibility work and assessments that need to be done. This work is usually, it can be quite substantial depending on the size of the project. The dollar amount associated with that type of brain power that is necessary to complete that work also can be in the several hundreds of thousands or several millions of dollars. is very slow or difficult to rely purely on private sector financing for this. For the same reason that you wouldn't rely purely on private sector financing to do all the research and development you need in science. Because the speed that private sector does that is going to be based on very short-term projects where they can see an immediate payback period. When you're talking about things with a longer payback period or with a more uncertain financial result immediately attached to the price tag, the private sector can move very slowly, especially if you're talking about a post-war environment. So the bilateral partners and the international financial institutions can play a key role in opening up more funding for feasibility studies, technical work, even beyond what's currently existing, to allow the private sector to lean in more heavily into Ukraine post-war and allow us to actually go from conceptualization to fundraising more quickly. Because if you just think about it, the money is always going to say at some point, we need to really understand the technical feasibility of this. Okay, you turn around to the people that can do that work, they're like, I need $1 million. Okay, you're not at a fundraising stage yet even. You're just trying to get the discussion going. This is the role where the international financial institutions and bilateral partners can step in and fill a gap. Secondly, after the war in Ukraine ends, which we all hope will be soon, we all hope will be in a meaningful way that supports Ukraine's victory, I can guarantee you that despite whatever initial exuberance is expressed by the private sector, whenever you're talking about big dollar amounts and payback periods that are longer than a very kind of short payback period, you're talking about 5 years, 10 years or longer, and you're talking about large amounts of investment that's needed to meaningfully impact Ukraine's post-war reconstruction, the money is always going to sit around and be like, yeah, but when's it going to start again? Yeah, but when is this happening? When is this happening? It's great the war just ended, but how sure are we that all sides are happy with this? So where this comes is there needs to be, in my opinion, and I think in the opinion of many of my private sector colleagues, a more programmatic and developed umbrella insurance policy for Ukraine beyond going to this institution or that institution and trying to do something based on existing structures. I would suggest there needs to be something new developed where maybe some of the money that is looking to be an economic Marshall Plan coming into Ukraine can be used to pay a massive insurance premium policy for the country, where you can, as a business, more programmatically come in and apply for a certain type of risk coverage or risk transfer that allows you to think more long-term and not just short-term, okay? Because otherwise you're going to have slower movement from large financial investors coming in to build larger projects. And that is what Ukraine needs. They don't just need short-term low-hanging fruit. It's very difficult to build an economy and provide better economic outcomes for Ukrainians and the country and basically make the world the way you want it to be if you're just doing everything on very short-term 3-year payback period projects, okay? It's like trying to build your 401k on $1 bills, $1 bill at a time. Yeah, it's meaningful, it works, but you want to be able to also do the larger scale, big ambitious projects. So that is, long story short, kind of my initial thoughts on everything. I've just described my project, which we think will be one of the largest, most ambitious infrastructure projects in Ukraine post-war. But like many colleagues, we all have our challenges. And if we look at the future, even if the war was to end today, there's certain key functions that the bilateral partners and international financial institutions can lean into in a more expansive way than they're already doing, which can kind of accelerate private sector money flowing into Ukraine and not sitting on the sidelines until more clarity is perceived.
Thank you, John. Well,
Yeah, just quick follow up on a few topics. First of all, I admire people like John and others who commit to Ukraine regardless of this challenging business environment and security risks. It gives hope to all businesses and to Ukrainians that once the just peace will be established, these projects will come into life and will benefit for Ukraine and for Ukraine's economy and for the people of Ukraine. But I think if one issue is to be taken from this presentation is about in the business context, it's a security risk. So security risk is priced in every business. So what John was taking is about the coverage of this risk. But if you take the cost of this to cover this risk on a countrywide scale, it's like trying to find the insurance in the epicenter of the 9 scale earthquake. So until the just peace is established, and what Ukraine really deserves is a just peace and a deterrent mechanism, it will be economically not feasible to develop the business on a larger scale and make such investments like it will. While I spoke, I wanted to make another point about the bank, because I spoke a lot about financing, but actually World Bank is also very good in knowledge. And what we are helping Ukraine is how to get out of this war stronger, and how to prepare for the changes and for economic development, for EU accession. So basically, there are 4 things that we focus right now. The first one, it's very important to keep a macro financial stability. So regardless the shock, the Ukraine should remain financially stable, inflation under control, reserves. So this provides the government the possibility to manage to run the country. And as I mentioned, we have done a good progress on that, and Ukraine is secured financially for the next year. Second, before such large investments can come into Ukraine, there is a transition period while we are fighting and still running the companies and doing businesses. And what we observe, businesses have constraints. So basically, the assets are underutilized by at least 25% in Ukraine. So what I mean specifically, let's say you have ArcelorMittal, the huge steel mill, but if they don't have a labor because their staff was mobilized, or if electricity supply is not stable, they scale down, they cannot operate. And same with many other businesses. So we are focusing to restore, to remove the constraint and to restore the basic services to the companies which already exist in Ukraine. They do not require much of additional investments, but just to remove the constraints so they can operate and generate tax revenue for Ukraine and jobs for the people. The third point is reforms for the EU integration. So Ukraine has declared its strategic objective to become an EU member. Obviously, there is a huge gap between the current institutional development in Ukraine and in Europe. So we need to build this transition, and reforms are costly. They require the money, the budget money to pay for these reforms. They require political capital. So we are helping the government of Ukraine to build the sequence and prioritize what can we do now while the war is still going on, which can bring us closer to the EU accession. And the last one, the fourth, is basically creating a level playing field in terms of productivity. Ukraine is still lagging very far behind in productivity versus any European peers and on the global level. And that lag in the theory breaks down to 3 parts: is the capital, labor, and technology. So capital, obviously, security risk is priced in. It's very difficult to bring foreign direct investments or any financing to Ukraine. On labor, we have the mobilization issue. Many businesses are facing shortages, but also we have a great skills mismatch. We have very inefficient labor markets. So we are supporting the government to change the labor code, which last was approved in 1976. So that's how the businesses operate right now under the 50 years old labor market regulation. And the third one is a technology. We do see a lot of this happening right now, technology diffusion, when Ukrainian companies absorb technologies from more developed countries, primarily in the military tech, but it also happens in other sectors. So we need more of that technology diffusion. Once these technologies are transferred to Ukraine, Ukraine can start innovating on a larger scale and basically come up with its own products that can go to the global markets, like Korea did, like Japan did. So now the military tech and the energy sector are the driving forces for this, but obviously we need more of that. So that's the areas the bank is helping. Now we are trying to set up a global alliance with the leading knowledge institutions like Growth Development Lab at Harvard and Growth Lab at Chicago University, Kiev School of Economics. Timothy spoke before me here, basically to bring this knowledge and to customize it to Ukrainian, how we can make these changes and in Ukraine to prepare ourselves better for the time when we can move on with larger investments and development. Thank you.
Please start thinking of your questions, and let me ask one first for John. In Georgia, for some years, there has been planning and effort to develop a deep water port, a nuclear container port. But because it was so close to Russian-occupied Abkhazia, in fact, it's within mortar range, if you will, of Russian forces there. There was a question that if there were disputes between Georgia and Russia at some point, that Russia could fire a few mortar shots into the port, maritime insurance rates would skyrocket, and the port would be in pretty bad shape. How about your port at Mykolaiv? How do you look at that kind of risk?
But that's a very good question. I think the shortest, most direct answer is we're not within mortar firing range of anyone. So we are graciously with the Berezan estuary outside of the kinetic area. That's never been one of the hot zones, but anything can be a hot zone. I think that it really does depend on how the war ends, and it's the status of the Black Sea that is more of an issue to us. So I would say that anything you build, whether it's in within mortar firing distance of the current kind of kinetic situation on the ground or not, it can always become a target. You know, we live in a world where drones and other kind of things come from the air, and you don't need to fire them, you know, from some point or a sea vessel. So anything can become a target. I believe that our location is favorably situated on the Berezan estuary in Mykolaiv. It's kind of tucked out of harm's way there, and our fate will hang with the fate of the Black Sea. And I'm very happy to say that I'm pretty bullish on that right now, given the way that the Ukrainians have been able to handle the Russian Navy without a Navy themselves to speak of, and push them out of, push their Black Sea fleet far out of the theater of action. So I'm optimistic that as Ukraine builds a proper Navy after the war, that it will be able to kind of police its trade corridors and maybe even prevent Russian incursions that had happened prior to this war. I think that Ukraine can become a strong military kind of bulwark against Russian aggression, you know, after the war, given its experience and, you know, its history now, unfortunately, of fighting the Russians in the way that it has and succeeding.
When Anakli was being considered, people were not thinking of the kinds of drones capabilities that exist now. So a mortar shot then is a drone shot today. So you're quite right to raise that. I would offer a slightly more pessimistic assessment. That would be the best way to protect your port is for Ukraine to be able to threaten a Russian port in Novorossiysk.
All for that.
Classic deterrence, if you will.
Yeah.
Questions? Walter, yes.
Mike.
Where's the microphone?
Follow up to the investors, how can we say, Mykolaiv, if I'm not mistaken, Mykolaiv, in the old days had a very good reputation for being shipbuilding. And so in a sense, I was going to ask you, John, this is wonderful because this is going to be, in terms of things like silk roads and everything else, bringing products to Europe through a great port. So you're building a port area. But have you also at some point in the distance, also looked for an expansion of facilities, or would your area be capable of also restoring that shipbuilding history that Nikolai had? And not only for commercial shipping, but actually for military shipping. We are lacking warships. So, is there something in the background that you've been that
I would say nothing immediate because we're still in the planning stages, but this industrial zone is kind of amorphous in terms of the types of companies that could be building there. So a shipbuilding facility could well exist there. I would say that the group that's involved with the project is very ambitious. We're not just involved with this project. We actually bought a smaller port in Ukraine last year. We're developing, we have several megawatts of renewable energy wind power projects currently operating in Ukraine that we are expanding out at this time. We have, again, we have biomass electricity projects. We have, we export several thousand tons of sunflower oil products every month from Ukraine. So I think the group that's behind the project in terms of the project sponsor is a very kind of ambitious and fleet on its feet type of thinking group. And so if that opportunity clarified itself, it'd be something that we surely could take a look at.
Okay, we have only 10 minutes left, so let's take several questions and then we'll ask our panelists to respond to them.
This might be in the same boat as the question that Mr. Zditsky asked, but considering that Romania, their offshore Black Sea land has a lot of oil, are there any plans for your port to be able to store any oil refineries, or basically just capitalize on the fact that there is a lot of untapped oil in the Black Sea, in Romanian land and possibly in Ukrainian land if like the Ukrainians go out and start looking for it?
Let me just, are there other questions? No other questions? Okay.
All right. The short story is, in terms of the port's infrastructure itself, we envision 10 berths. One of those berths will be devoted to petroleum products, liquefied natural gas and liquefied petroleum gas. In terms of Ukraine's petroleum reserves, that is maybe something for the natural resource investors to look at. I know that there's a lot of interest in kind of shale gas, or there has historically been. I do know that the coal beds in Ukraine are they have a lot of methane, so that lends a lot of, I guess, shale gas drilling type of capabilities there. I also know it's kind of technologically complicated, so it's not just simply you drill down and you can get it out. So I imagine that as Ukraine's natural resources in all forms, including petroleum, continue to be maybe developed and further honed for export. Our port envisions being, a key hub for that, and to make it as easy as possible for people to store and ship their products through.
Great. Let's thank our panelists for a terrific discussion.